The table was long, heavy, with roasted chicken, glazed carrots, and bowls of mashed potatoes steaming under the chandelier. Forks scraped plates, glasses clinked, and my sister's laughter carried louder than anyone else's. I sat near the end, cutting my chicken into neat pieces, trying to melt into the background as I always did. Then she leaned back in her chair, smirk curling across her face. Still living off food stamps, she said, voice sharp enough to slice through the warmth in the room. Must be tough pretending to be successful. Her words hung in the air. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth, my stomach tightened, heat crawling up my neck. Around me, chairs shifted, eyes darted down to plates. A few chuckled softly as if cruelty were something ordinary, as if humiliation belonged to me. I stared at the chicken growing cold, trying to swallow without choking. My chest felt tight, but I said nothing. The cake I had brought, a small chocolate one wrapped in a white box with careful hands, sat unopened in the center of the table. No one noticed it, and I asked myself, when did I become nothing more than their favorite joke? The sting of my sister's remark lingered like smoke long after her laughter faded. Sitting at that table, I couldn't help but drift backward, pulled into the years that had shaped me into the woman they so easily dismissed. I was the quiet one growing up, the dependable one. The child who folded laundry without being asked, who stayed late to wash the dishes, who made sure the dog had food before I even sat down for my own dinner. My parents would pat my shoulder absently, not out of pride but out of habit, as if I were a piece of furniture they appreciated but never truly saw. My sister, on the other hand, glowed under every spotlight. Rachel had the smile that charmed teachers, the quick wit that made relatives roar with laughter, the beauty that turned heads at church picnics. She was the star, and I was the one who carried her bag to the car while everyone congratulated her. Birthdays were the clearest reminders of that imbalance. Rachel's gifts were big, wrapped in glossy paper and tied with bows that sparkled. Mine were small things, a sweater a size too big, a paperback book chosen without thought, a card scribbled with love mom and dad as if they couldn't even manage a full sentence. I learned to smile, to whisper thanks, to tuck my disappointment into the corners of my room. I remember one birthday in particular, my 16th. Rachel received a new camera, something she had begged for, and the whole family took turns snapping photos of her posing with it. When it came time for my gift, I opened a shoebox to find a pair of socks and a bar of soap. Everyone laughed, calling it practical. I laughed too, even though my chest ached. That night, I biked to the grocery store, bought myself a small chocolate cake, and ate one slice in silence. The rest sat in the fridge until it went stale. That was when the cake became my private ritual, a quiet reminder that if no one else would celebrate me, I would at least try to celebrate myself. Years passed and the pattern never changed. Rachel's milestones were paraded through the living room like parades: her prom, her engagement, her wedding. I stood on the sidelines holding cameras, fetching tissues, clapping politely. When I graduated college, the first in our family to do so, my parents congratulated me quickly, then turned to Rachel and admired her new dress. I stood there in my cap and gown, holding my diploma invisible. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I felt tired. Tired of proving, tired of being measured and found lacking. And so I poured myself into work. I wasn't brilliant at first. I stumbled, failed interviews, took jobs that barely paid rent. I worked nights at a diner serving coffee to truck drivers, then clocked in at a temp office job the next morning with eyes that stung from lack of sleep. When Rachel teased me for collecting name tags like hobbies, I bit my tongue. But somewhere in those years of exhaustion, I started to build something solid. I learned how to manage accounts, how to pitch ideas, how to balance books that didn't want to balance. A manager once told me, "You're the only one I can trust to stay until it's finished." At the time, it felt like another way of saying I was expendable. Now I know it meant I had endurance. Still, at family gatherings, my progress was invisible. Rachel flaunted new handbags, new vacations, new furniture her husband bought. My own achievements, my small promotions, my steady rise were treated like footnotes. Sitting at the dinner table that night, listening to her insult me, I thought of all those years when my life had been measured against hers and always declared insufficient. I thought of the birthdays where I ate cake alone, I thought of the shoebox of rejection letters I once kept, every "we regret to inform you" folded carefully, a collection of failures that no one else cared to see. And I thought of the nights I walked home from work under flickering streetlights, carrying grocery bags that cut into my palms, whispering to myself that one day it would matter, that one day the sacrifices would mean something. The cake on the table that night wasn't just dessert. It was a reminder of those lonely birthdays of the years when celebration meant nothing more than one quiet slice, eaten in the dark. And as my sister's words echoed in the dining room, I realized I had carried that silence with me into adulthood. What startled me wasn't her cruelty, it was my family's indifference. No one spoke up. No one said, "That's enough." Their silence was the same silence I had grown up with. It pressed against my skin, heavy and familiar. I sat there, breathing slowly, steadying myself. My sister's smirk was the same one she had worn when she won spelling bees and cheerleading trophies, when she whispered behind my back at school. She hadn't changed, and perhaps neither had they. But I had. I wasn't the same girl who bought herself a stale cake. I wasn't the one who measured her worth in scraps of attention. I had built something from the ground up, something none of them had bothered to notice. And for the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of defiance. Not loud, not explosive, just steady quiet, like a flame refusing to go out. The air at the table grew heavy after my sister's remark, but she wasn't finished. She never was. Rachel thrived on attention, on the way her words could bend a room around her. She leaned forward now, chin propped on her hand, her bracelets jingling like punctuation marks. So she said, drawing out the syllable, "What exactly are you doing these days, besides playing pretend? Don't tell me you're still writing those little business plans no one reads." The words landed like stones, one after another. A few people chuckled their laughter, nervous and thin. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My mother pretended to fuss with the gravy boat, as if ceramic could shield her from discomfort. I forced my lips into a curve that might have looked like a smile. My napkin twisted in my lap, the fabric wrinkling beneath my fingers. I could feel my pulse in my temples. For a moment I wondered if they could see it, the red flushing across my skin, the silent storm pressing behind my ribs. Rachel wasn't done. She never stopped when she sensed weakness. "You know," she added, lowering her voice into a mock whisper that everyone could still hear, "some people are just meant to be ordinary. And that's okay. We can't all marry rich or climb the ladder. Somebody has to stay at the bottom." I swallowed hard-tasting bitterness that had nothing to do with food. The roasted chicken on my plate had gone cold, congealed edges of gravy sticking like glue. I pressed my fork against it but couldn't make myself eat. Around the table, the silence stretched. My cousin tried to speak up, blurting out something about the weather, about how much snow the forecast predicted for next week. But Rachel waved it away with a laugh, circling back to me as though the entire evening had been set up for this theater. "You always take everything so seriously," she said. "Why can't you laugh at yourself? We're just joking. We all know you mean well." The words were sugar-coated poison. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes sliding toward me, some pitying, some amused, most simply unwilling to intervene. They had seen this performance before. They knew the script. Rachel teased, I absorbed. She sparkled, I dimmed. Inside, though, I felt a flicker, a small, stubborn spark of defiance. It surprised me because for years I had learned to swallow moments like these, to bury my anger in silence, to leave family gatherings with a smile pasted on and tears waiting until the car door shut. But tonight, the spark wouldn't fade. I glanced toward the center of the table. The white box with the cake sat untouched, its ribbon slightly crooked from where I had tied it too tightly. It was supposed to be shared, a sweet gesture for the family. Instead, it looked like a witness quietly observing the cruelty, waiting for someone to open it. I thought of all the cakes before it, birthdays where no one remembered, so I remembered for myself. Nights when I bought sweetness just to prove I was worth one candle, even if I never lit it. That cake had become my secret proof of survival. And tonight it reminded me that silence didn't have to mean surrender. Rachel lifted her wine glass, swirling the liquid as though she were hosting a talk show. Honestly, she said, I don't know how you keep showing up. If I were in your shoes, I'd be embarrassed. Something inside me shifted then. Not an explosion, not anger boiling over. It was steadier than that, like a stone settling into place after years of imbalance. I set my fork down gently, the clink against porcelain sharp in the quiet room. For once, all the eyes at the table were truly on me, waiting. I met my sister's gaze, steady, unflinching. She raised her brows, expecting another collapse, another retreat into silence. But I didn't retreat. Not yet, not this time. Instead, I folded my napkins slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from the fabric, buying myself breath and calm. I could feel the eyes, the weight of judgment and expectation pressing on my shoulders. But I also felt something else, something they didn't know about, something I had carried quietly for years, building in the shadows where none of them had cared to look. Rachel tilted her head, clearly amused. What? No witty comeback. Not even a little defense. The smirk on her face told me she thought she had won, that she always would. But the night wasn't finished. I lifted my glass of water, took a measured sip, and set it down carefully. My hand no longer shook. The spark inside me had grown steadier, like a flame beginning to catch. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to match her cruelty with my own. All I needed was patience. Because in my bag only a few feet away was the proof of everything she had denied, the proof that silence was not the same as failure. And as the conversation moved forward, circling around desserts and weekend plans, I sat quietly, letting the flame grow. I didn't have to fight her words with words. Soon I would let something else speak for me. I glanced once more at the unopened cake, its white box glowing softly under the chandelier's light. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself a small, secret smile. I used to walk home beneath streetlights that buzzed like tired insects, clutching grocery bags that cut red lines into my palms. Rent notices piled on my counter, rejection letters stacked in a shoebox beneath my bed. I wore the same pair of shoes until the soles peeled, working nights at the diner and mornings in a cramped office where no one knew my name. My sister's voice echoed even then, mocking, dismissive, but I kept moving one small step at a time. Every failure pressed me down, yet somehow also pushed me forward, shaping a quiet resilience they never saw. The chatter at the table softened into an uneasy hum, as if even the clinking of silverware grew cautious. Rachel, satisfied with her performance, reached for her wine again, swirling it with that familiar air of victory. Her smirk widened and she leaned across the table. "You'll never be more than a burden, let's face it," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The words should have broken me the way they always had before, but instead I felt something settle inside me, calm, certain, unshakable. I set my fork down with deliberate care, the sound of metal against porcelain ringing sharper than her laughter. Then I reached for my bag at the side of my chair. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. Every breath I took was measured, steady, as though I had rehearsed this moment in secret for years. I pulled out the glossy magazine, its cover gleaming beneath the chandelier. My face stared back at me from the page, bold letters across the top, spelling out what none of them had believed possible: Forbes. I slid the magazine across the table toward Rachel. For once, she fell silent. The smirk dissolved, her eyes narrowing, as if she were trying to make sense of what she saw. Around us, the room hushed. Forks paused mid-air, glasses remained suspended in hands, the air itself seemed to stop. My father blinked, leaning closer. My mother's hand froze on the gravy boat. Cousins shifted in their seats, with whispers escaping before they could catch themselves. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed again, words caught in her throat. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The cover spoke louder than any defense I could have mounted, louder than all the years of silence I had endured. I sat back, folded my napkin neatly, and let the stillness wrap around us. Someone finally broke the silence, my aunt, her voice uncertain, whispering, "That's really you." I nodded once, no smile, no boast, just acknowledgement. Rachel tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. It must be some small feature, right? Just a mention." Her voice trembled, betraying her. I didn't answer. I only reached for the cake box in the center of the table, slid the ribbon loose, and lifted the lid. The scent of chocolate filled the air as I cut the first slice. The knife's edge against the cardboard plate sounded louder than her protests. I placed the piece before me, took a bite, and let the sweetness dissolve on my tongue. The silence remained heavy but different now. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of recognition, of disbelief, of grudging respect. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under their gaze. I was the one holding it steady, letting them see what they had overlooked all these years. And in that moment, I understood something profound. I no longer needed their approval. Their stunned silence was enough. The magazine sat between us like a mirror no one wanted to look into, and the silence that followed was thick enough to press against my skin. My father was the first to move, adjusting his glasses and leaning closer, his voice cracking as he muttered, "Is this real?" as though the glossy cover might dissolve into smoke if he stared long enough. My mother's lips parted, her fork suspended above her plate, and for once she had no quick remark, no busy distraction to offer. The cousins whispered among themselves, leaning over plates, their eyes wide with the kind of awe usually reserved for strangers on television. Rachel sat frozen, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand, the bravado that always wrapped her like armor slipping away piece by piece. She forced a laugh, high-pitched and brittle. It must be some kind of local issue, right? Not the actual Forbes. Her words tried to climb to regain their old rhythm of mockery, but the quiver in her tone betrayed her. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My hand moved instead to the cake, guiding the knife through the soft sponge, the sound of cardboard plates scraping faintly beneath the chandelier. The simple act of cutting the cake felt ceremonial, like drawing a line between the years of invisibility behind me and the truth now laid bare. I served myself first, sliding the slice onto my plate, the chocolate scent rising into the hushed air. Every eye followed the movement, as if the knife itself carried authority. I took a bite, slowly savoring the sweetness, the silence amplifying the quiet defiance of the gesture. My aunt spoke next, her voice tentative. "Why didn't you tell us? Why keep it a secret?" I looked at her and let the truth rest on my tongue as simply as the cake did. "Because you never asked," I said softly. The words weren't bitter, but they landed heavy. My father shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, while my mother finally set her fork down, fumbling for a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We are proud of you, you know," she said, her tone forced, as though trying to rewrite years of neglect in a single sentence. I met her gaze, but didn't respond, letting the silence do the work for me. Rachel, meanwhile, had gone pale. She set her glass down with a thud, searching for her footing. Well, she began, covers don't mean everything. Lots of people get featured and still, fade out. But no one echoed her, no one laughed. The room's gravity had shifted. The cousins leaned toward me now, curious, respectful, asking quiet questions about my work, about how it had happened. Their voices held something I had never heard at this table, directed at me, interest. Rachel bristled, eyes darting as if she could pull the spotlight back to herself, but it was gone. I felt it, the shift as tangible as the air after a storm. My mother reached across the table, her fingers brushing my wrist, too light to anchor, too late to matter. "You should have told us," she repeated, softer this time, almost pleading. I took another bite of cake and smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but out of clarity. I finally understood that the validation I had chased for so long was never going to come from them, not in the way I once needed, and strangely, that realization didn't ache. It freed me. Rachel cleared her throat, reaching for sarcasm as a shield. "So, what's next? Do we all bow down every time you walk in?" But her laugh died when no one joined. Even my father looked away from her, shaking his head, slightly disappointment shading his face for the first time, not directed at me. I sat in that quiet, steady, in my chair, the Forbes cover glinting under the chandelier, the slice of cake disappearing bite by bite. For once, I wasn't shrinking, wasn't waiting for permission to belong. Their silence told me everything. The room was mine, not because I demanded it, but because I had already earned it elsewhere. Later that night, after the plates were cleared and the murmurs of the dinner faded into the background, I sat quietly in my chair, watching the last of the candlelight flicker against the half-empty glasses. The Forbes magazine still lay on the table, its cover gleaming under the chandelier, untouched by greasy fingerprints, guarded by the silence that no one had dared to break fully. I felt the weight of the moment pressing against me not as a burden, but as an echo reminding me of all the years that had led here. I thought back to the shoebox of rejection letters tucked beneath my bed, to the nights when exhaustion blurred my vision as I worked late into dawn, to the countless times I had swallowed words that might have defended me, but chose instead to let silence protect me. And yet here I was not broken, not small, not invisible, but present and undeniable. The irony was sharp. It had taken glossy pages and bold headlines for them to finally see me, when the truth was, I had been carving myself into existence long before any magazine cared to notice. I stared at the cake, now missing its first neat slice, and remembered all the cakes that had gone uneaten in my refrigerator, shriveling into symbols of loneliness. Tonight's cake tasted different not because of the sugar or the chocolate, but because I had cut it openly in front of them all without apology. It was mine, claimed without shame. Still a question nagged at me, curling in the edges of my mind. Why did it require something so public, so undeniable for them to recognize me? Would they have ever looked at me without the validation of strangers, without the cover that shouted louder than I ever could? The thought stung, but it also clarified something. Their approval had never been the compass. It had only been a shadow I mistook for light. My real strength had been born in the quiet, in the discipline no one applauded, in the nights when I kept going because stopping meant disappearing. That was the victory I carried, not the magazine. The magazine was a mirror they could no longer ignore, but the truth was, I had already been whole without it. As the conversation at the table shifted awkwardly to travel plans and work gossip, I tuned out, letting their voices fade into a distant hum. I focused instead on the steady rhythm of my breath, on the hum of the chandelier on the way. My own presence no longer felt like an intrusion. For once, I did not sit waiting to be dismissed. I did not measure myself against my sister's laughter or my mother's disinterest. I measured myself against the flame inside me that had endured every slight, every dismissal, every lonely birthday, and still burned steady. That flame was mine alone. I thought of Rachel sitting stiffly across the table, her face still pale, her laugh emptied of power. For years, I had wanted her to acknowledge me, to stop turning my life into a punchline. Tonight, I realized I didn't need that acknowledgement. Her silence was louder than any insult she could muster, and it was enough. My gaze drifted toward my parents, their expressions painted with a mix of confusion and belated pride, as if trying to rewrite years in the span of one evening. I felt no urge to correct them, no urge to demand apologies that would never come sincerely. Some truths were too heavy for them to carry, and I had already carried enough for all of us. The chandelier flickered, catching the reflection of the glossy cover once more, and I let the image settle inside me like a final piece sliding into place. I wasn't here to be their success story, their sudden source of pride. I was here because I chose to be, because this table no longer had the power to define me. The cake was sweet on my tongue, the magazine was bright under the light, and my silence now was not surrender, it was sovereignty. When the evening finally ended, I slipped on my coat and stepped outside into the cool night air, the quiet of the street wrapping around me like a gentler silence than the one I had just left. The house behind me still hummed faintly with voices, but they no longer carried the same weight, no longer clung to me the way they once had. I walked slowly to my car, the magazine tucked under my arm, the taste of chocolate still lingering on my tongue. For years, I had longed for recognition, for a moment when my family would see me not as the shadow beside Rachel, but as a woman of my own making. Tonight I realized that recognition was never truly theirs to give. It had always been mine to claim. The pain of their neglect, of being overlooked and dismissed, had carved deep grooves in me, but those grooves had also guided me forward, teaching me persistence, teaching me how to stand steady, even when the ground shook. I no longer needed their applause. Their silence at that table had been enough, because it proved they could no longer deny me. The lesson I carried with me was not about triumphing over them, but about choosing myself, about finally understanding that my worth had never been measured by their opinions. In the glow of the street lamp, I thought of the countless nights when I whispered promises to myself, when I lit no candles on forgotten birthdays, yet still dreamed of something better. Tonight felt like the fulfillment of those whispers, not because of the magazine, but because of the calm in my chest, the certainty that I had come home to myself. As I unlocked my car and slid into the seat, I glanced once more at the house, then let the sight go. I didn't need them to change. I only needed to continue forward, lighter, freer, steady in my own truth. The cake had been mine all along, and now so was the silence.